Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Bloom the Podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode. I'm your host, Donovan. I'm here with my co-host, Ashley. And we have a super special guest for this episode. We have our friend, Tori. How's it going?
Good. How are you guys?
Good. Yeah, so we are super excited to have you on today. We've had a few different guests that are all kind of in the family. So now we have, someone that's outside of the family circle joining the podcast for this first time. So we're super excited for that. But before we jump into the topic, I'd like to give you the floor a little bit to kind of introduce yourself, say what you're doing right now, what you're into, and where you're at in life.
All right. Well, I am currently a sophomore in college at College of the Canyons, and my major is political science, and it's shifting into communications. But I'm pretty much just studying and working, and I've been doing a YouTube channel for the past couple years. It started with vlogging, and now it's turning into a kind of highlighting different controversial topics that I'd like to address and get the world's opinion on, biblical opinion, whatever.
Yeah, and the YouTube channel is one of the reasons that I had reached out to you to join the show, because I'd watched your YouTube channel. I was very intrigued and I loved the idea. So what was kind of like the motivation behind starting or moving it that way on your YouTube?
Yeah, I think I had just been like getting these ideas like over the past couple of years, just like filtering them through my family with my grandparents, my parents. We usually have like conversations at the dinner table, and I was like, how can I put this on video and not make it weird? And so even from that, switching to just like the people I was surrounding myself with at the basketball court and whatever, I just wanted to get a deeper understanding of why people think like the way that they think. Like, what's your reasoning behind these controversial like topics? And then with COVID, it kind of switched into, okay, here are some like practical things that people are thinking about and they're forced to think about on the daily.
Right. That's really cool. Yeah. So we'll leave all the links for her YouTube channel and all that in the description. So make sure you guys go check that out. It's really interesting, and I think you guys would all enjoy it. So getting into today's episode, we have a fun one. We're going to be talking about youth ministries and our experiences with youth ministries and kind of our thoughts on it in a couple different aspects. So I'll pass it over to you actually first. As far as youth ministries go, what was your time in youth ministries like? Like, what were some of the highlights? What were some of the lowlights for you? As far as spiritually speaking, because I mean, we all have like, oh, I wasn't that popular, or oh, I don't have that many friends, or whatever. So more on the spiritual side of things, what were some of the highlights and what were some of the lowlights for you?
I know for me, honestly, most of high school, I was trying to get out of high school group. Like, I know for me, I actually started going to the college group. Thanks to, having older siblings. I was like, oh, I can go with them. But I enjoyed the teaching in high school ministry for sure. I feel like there was a lot of good messages. But my thing was, I just didn't like the whole atmosphere of it. It kind of felt like a whole bunch of junior hires hanging out, like, let's play a whole bunch of obnoxious games and like do all this stuff. And like, it wasn't focused on like anything spiritual really, like besides the message. Everything else was just like all over the place, and it was just like a whole bunch of kids running around crazy, and I was like, okay, like that was kind of my experience with like going to high school group.
Are you seconding that, or what was your experiences like?
I would say I would agree with like half of that. Okay. And that I experienced all of that, but on top of that, it was like I was trying to get in the group and be a part of it, be a leader, grow the group, because I noticed all of those like, oh, we're all acting like middle schoolers, and like we're like, what's the focus here? And so I would try to get in, and when I started working with the leaders, it was always kind of felt like they were like suppressing my ideas or something like that, in the sense of like, oh, like, but my ideas are coming from the Bible. Like, I I want to like achieve this in our group. And I think every group can always be growing. And it was always like,
Right.
okay, so why do you want me a part of the group if you don't want my, like, you know, so it's kind of like a balance of that.
Yeah.
So
I would say, I agree, because, I mean, we've obviously been to the same churches, but, yeah, I think the thing for me that I noticed a lot, kind of going to what you were saying about the leadership, is the leadership didn't really inspire the kids to want to do more than the bare minimum.
Yeah.
You know, they always kind of treated the kids as not really like adults, or a lot younger than they actually were. And I think that's the dangerous thing, because when you have a bunch of like 16, 17, 18-year-old kids that are kind of being dumbed down into playing games and doing all those things, not that those things are wrong, but that's not the emphasis of why we're there. We go to church and we go to these studies so that way we can learn about God and further our walk with God, and, you know, be there to fellowship with believers and grow each other. Iron sharpens iron. That's what it's there for. But I feel like a lot of time the emphasis is on the camps and the games and, you know, the other things that aren't really as beneficial, because they think that the kids need to be entertained, or, you know, they need to have like something fun to do. So I think kind of putting them on that lower level is the first issue that I had with some of the youth groups that I was a part of, just because it made the kids feel like they could get away with not having to be involved and not having to serve. And I think that was kind of a struggle.
You know what I think the thing is like, you know, like, I feel like it was almost like they wanted to be as far away as being known as like those Christian people. You know, like everyone thinks like a church acts a certain way, and they were trying to appease so much to like other people instead of being like, yeah, we are a church and we should be acting this way. It's like, no, we have to appease to like the unbelieving kids who want to listen to this music and act this way, you know? Like, it was just trying to be cool, not like...
Yeah. I would say, like, even to go on top of that is, it was, like, the focus of the church should be on equipping and encouraging and, like, pushing us out into the world. And so when we come and meet, it's to do that. But, like, the focus I found was always, like, let's evangelize to these kids. So here are the games. Here are, like, the fun outreaches we can do. And they were evangelizing the people in the church. But the church is supposed to come around side of each other and push us out to the world. Like, for the other 6 or 7 days of the week, you're with the world. You need to be the light. And if you're not getting the encouragement and the equipping at church, then you're kind of left empty. It's like another game.
Yeah.
That's so true. And I think that ultimately comes back to the teaching of the leadership. And that's one thing that I always struggled with as well, because, I mean, I've sat under some really good youth pastors, and I've sat under some other youth pastors where it's a lot of pulling punches, and it's not really saying what needs to be said, and kind of letting these kids not really get a deep understanding of God's word. And when you're sending these kids, like you're saying, out into the world without that deep understanding of God's word, all they really have are Bible stories that they don't know how to apply to their lives. So like, okay, Jonah ran away from Nineveh. Now what do I do with that? Instead of diving deep into those stories and really pulling out the application and what God wants us to learn from those things, they just have that like sort of surfacey knowledge, and they don't really know what to do with it. So I think that's a big problem as well.
Yeah.
What about you? Would you say the same?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, yeah. So as far as youth group and like those things are concerned, what are some things that you would like to see implemented that would help those situations a little bit more?
I mean, I think it's just that refocus of like, what's our purpose? Why are we here? And if we're here to grow, then let's equip people and let's do that. So like in my church, we would have like little meetings, like what are aspects you want to see change? And you'd say those things. It wouldn't really happen. But I think to make that, like, apply that practically, and like different circumstances, like, because I've gone through so many leaders in youth ministry, like that was really disheartening. And I think some of the things we need are like stability and consistency. Like, you need someone there who wants to be there, not just there for a year, moving on to be like the head pastor of a church. Like kids
people that care about the kids.
Yeah, people who care about the kids. Because like the kids don't know what they want. Like, there are the kids like us maybe who are true believers and actually like have a plan and know that God is speaking into our lives. But for those kids, like, you need to notice who they are and run with them. Like, don't leave them in the dust.
Yeah.
Because they're going to sit there and want to grow, and you're going to leave them behind for a bunch of kids who aren't ready yet, because God hasn't equipped their hearts. God hasn't enlightened them maybe to be about growth, because if you're not willing to grow, then you're not going to grow.
Yeah, your heart has to be open. The Lord has to be doing that work in those kids. And I would second that, to say, to have leaders that have a little bit more life experience. A lot of the youth groups that I've been to, the leaders are like freshly out of college, or even maybe still in college. And I understand, like, you want to get people that are like more relatable to the kids and like all that. But I struggle, because the leader that I, had the best bond with, and shout out to Will Chung, that's my guy. He's lived life. He was an adult, and he had so much wisdom to pour in. And a lot of times when I had conversations with the younger youth leaders, they'd be in the same position as me, like, I actually don't know. I actually haven't experienced that. And like, it's good to get people in young and grow them up in the ministry if that's what they're gonna do. But I think maybe have them shadow, not be like the main leader, because they're not going to be able to impart as much wisdom. And there are some really, knowledgeable and wise young people that are out there, but even just by the number of years, they're not going to be as knowledgeable as believers that have lived 40 years or 30 years, or have a family, have a wife, have kids. So I think getting more knowledgeable leaders in there is a big thing.
I think there's like a mix of that, where I would say, like, it's okay if you're young, and it goes back to the 1 Timothy, or is it 2 Timothy verse that says, don't look down on people because they're young, but let them set an example for the believers.
Right.
And I think the hard thing was, I felt like so stuck, because I'm like this 16-year-old girl in a high school group with maybe like a 23-year-old leader who was like a new Christian, and like this was always like how it went. New Christian comes in, they're the leader, and they want to serve, and I think that's great, but this isn't the place, because youth is like the biggest rate of people that come to Christ, and if you're not like investing in that, like, I was always like, can we get like a married couple in here? Like, I want to learn from someone, like, I want to learn from someone that I foresee myself in the future, like shortly, not someone that's like asking me questions about like, how do we evangelize? It's like, oh, you're supposed to be telling me. You're supposed to be planning the outreach, and I'm supposed to like follow your example. And so if I can't follow your example, why are these our leaders? And I think that's just like really hard.
I'd have to like second that for sure, because like thinking back to like my high school experience, there was really only one small group leader I ever had where I was like, oh, like, I want to be like her, like, when I'm older, like, that's the path I want to take in my life. Like, none of the other leaders were relatable at all. It was more, like, completely, like, oh, like, judging you for, like, your decisions, even though your decisions are, like, pretty normal. They're just, like, not in that headspace, they're, like, super young, and they're, like, married, like, just, like, random stuff to them is, like, weird, because they just don't have that experience yet. So it's just odd.
Yeah, one other thing too, and kind of going back to the younger leaders, is they're like trained to be a little bit too pushy on the kids. You want the kids to be seeking out the discipleship relationships, and you want to be there in open arms, ready to receive them. But these people are like forcing their way into these kids' lives, and it's like you're really pushing them away from even wanting that relationship by beating them over the head, like, we need to have accountability, like, right now. It's like, relax. Like, they'll come to you when like you said, when their heart is ready to have those kinds of meaningful relationships. And I feel like when they're just trying to be like relatable and be your friend because they're like closer to your age, it makes it a little bit harder to do that.
I think even like what I saw was in my church, at least, was we'd have like super legalistic, like on the dot, like calling people out, and they were the older and they were the more mature people, and then everyone was like, oh wait, we don't want that, like, that's not good. So then they switched it in reverse. They were like, let's get the younger people in that are relatable, but it was like not that it's charismatic, but it's like the liberal Christian versus the super conservative. And it was like never like a balance of, okay, why don't we just get a steady person who's willing to listen, but also has like a life that is a great example that we can follow.
Yeah. There's always a middle ground to everything. And I actually have another point that I want to bring up on that. But before we do, we're going to do our little ad for Sparkling Ice because they're super good. Make sure you guys tag them in the comments below. And we got to get that sponsorship. I can never say that word. I say sponsorship every time.
That's a good catchphrase though.
Sponsorship. I can't even say that now. Gotta love Sparkling Ice, guys. Make sure you guys tag them below. We gotta make sure they see this one. But circling back to what you were saying, I think one thing that's important is emphasizing the relationship with kids and their parents. Because I think one thing that the youth group and youth groups do is they kind of make these youth group leaders and small group leaders take the place of these kids' parents. And obviously every family situation is different, and some kids might not even have believing parents. But I feel like the majority of kids that go to youth group are there because they do have believing parents. So what was that like for you? And, kind of, I don't know what your family life is like, but did you have that bond with your parents where you felt like you had to go to a small group leader, or do you feel like you were more reliant on your parents for that?
I think for me, it's kind of a mix of, I knew, like, me and my parents were always on the same page and I was able to have conversations with them. Mm-hmm. But I think there are some things, like when you're a young kid, like, I don't know, 12 to 16, 17, 18, you don't want to go to your parents for everything. You're like, I am becoming independent and I need to like form my opinions outside of them. And I think there's a healthy balance of like being able to do that. But I mean, I do think I see like the youth ministry, like they're trying to like put parents, and I see that a lot of places. They want to take the parents out of, like the true parents out of the home and replace it with teachers or youth leaders, whatever. Yeah. And it's like there is an importance to have your family, your parents in your life and speaking over how you like live, and even like setting boundaries in different areas. Right. And cultivating relationship and worldview and all this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that's beneficial, because like you said, there's a balance. I've always felt like I could go to my parents for anything, but there is that balance of having someone that's outside of your family that can look at you and be like, this is what I see in you. And obviously my parents have always been very honest with us, and they want the best for us. So if we're cutting up, they're going to let us know about it. But there is something that's really strong about also having someone outside of the family. But I think it is dangerous when kids feel like they can't go to their parents. Yeah. And they feel like they should be going to someone else instead. I think it should be encouraged, and that's one thing that I also love about Will Chung. I can talk about him enough, but he always encouraged me to talk things through with the people that I'm close with, being my parents, siblings, and then he said, like, come to me afterwards. Yeah. And that was always encouraging because I always knew he was there, but it wasn't like he was trying to be my dad or he was trying to replace that for me. So that was important. What about you?
I think that was the cool thing. Shout out to Mrs. Tiersip. But I think that was the cool thing about having her as like a small group leader, was like she had kids and she had a good relationship with her kids. So she like knew exactly what role to play. Yeah. Like, as in like balancing like, hey, like you talk to me, but you can also talk to your parents, because like it was like she knows, and that was like really cool, like I was like, oh, it's like a second mom, like you just go to her, but she's also going to encourage me to go to my mom, so I just think that's like really cool.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, it's so important to have the people that like know how to, because a lot of times I think the younger people are going to be able to relate better, but it's really the parents that understand kids because they have their own that are actually going to be able to look at it and kind of come at it from a more strategic angle, not just like the buddy thing.
And I think like one thing that I've noticed is like it's good to have your parents' opinion, and like I usually seek that out first, honestly, but even as a kid to like relate that back with someone who does have the outer perspective of your life, like not just your family, and someone who honestly, a lot of my parents were friends with my small group leaders, so they know how my family works. They know our like story, and they were able to then like speak into my life better because of the communication between everyone and knowing that. One other thing I was going to say was, oh my gosh, I just forgot. But
it'll come back. It'll come to you.
Keep going.
It'll come back. But yeah, and I think being able to have open conversations with your parents is honestly what makes you want to have those other relationships outside too, because being able to have real talk with your siblings and parents, like, I mean, every night at dinner, it'd be something. It's always something that comes up, or like, oh, well, how did you get to that conclusion? Or why do you think this? Or after every sermon we heard on Sunday, they'd come home and be like, well, why? Or like, what did you get from it? Or, how are you going to apply that? And it really, really challenges you as a kid. And to have someone that does that in your youth group as well is super important. And like I said before, I think that's what's lacking a lot, is that challenge to the kids to make them really like process and think about what they're hearing and what they're learning and why they believe it. 'Cause especially for kids that grow up in church, a lot of times they say they're Christian and they say they believe the Bible, but that's because that's all they know. And then the moment they go to college or they're out of their parents' house, you see a lot of kids drop off. So to really challenge them while they're young and while they're, in those groups, I think is really important.
Yeah, and I think also the thing is that kids in high school ministry don't even know how to talk to an adult. So when they bring in adults as the small group leaders, they're like, oh, I can't say anything, like this old lady's here, that's like literally how it is. And that's just like so sad, because it's like, that's like where you're gonna grow the most, and like I just feel like they should like be encouraging you to like teaching you while you're in high school group, like, hey, like it is totally okay to like talk to older people. Matter of fact, that's probably what you should be doing. You know what I'm saying? So like bringing those people in for those roles is honestly helpful in that area too, because some people are like, I don't even know how to talk to my parents, but like if you're having like an older lady as your small group leader, you start like getting in like, oh, okay, like, wow, this is actually nice. I could talk to my mom, or I could talk to these people who are older,
I think that's like a blessing from like my childhood growing up, is my parents were always like, here's a little bit of everything. So like we were always introduced to older people. Like we would hang out with our grandparents and their friends, and then people my parents' age, and it was like, you're gonna sit at the dinner table and you're gonna eat with everyone here and have conversation, and even if you don't have anything to say, you're gonna sit and wait until everyone's done. And that's just kind of like, that's where you like, you start by like that, I'm just sitting here, and you just hear things, and then eventually you like start to engage in conversation. You're like, okay, I do have a seat at the table. I can talk to people who are older and wiser, and they probably want to hear from me too. So
I think that's the other thing too, is changing the mindset for the kids, because I think a lot of kids, most kids have that mindset of like, oh, I'm talking to an adult, they don't want to talk about video games or movies, so I'm out. But really trying to glean from the older people and realizing that the older people are very interested in what the young people, where they're at in their lives, especially if they have something, biblical or spiritual to say. I think, everyone's welcome to hearing that. So I think changing the mindset and really wanting kids to enjoy deep conversation and, meaningful conversation, not just, all the surfacey, kid stuff.
Right. It's kind of funny to like think about it too, because like in high school there's like so much drama and stuff. But the thing I remember the most of was having drama with my small group leaders, because they were so young. You know what I'm saying? Like being like, oh, like this
asking
person,
you about their boyfriend. You're like, I don't know.
It was just like, I just remember always being like, oh, I'm like so uncomfortable. I feel like me and this person have beef, and I'm like, I should not feel that way when I'm like going to small groups. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so awkward.
I don't know if I ever experienced beef with my small group.
Not like an experience like that, but I'm saying like I just remember feeling like super uncomfortable, or like, oh, they're like totally like being judgmental of this, or, like random stuff, because they're just like young and they're just like,
might be a girl thing.
Exactly. You know what? That's so true.
I think it's partly a girl thing, but I think I would agree, like if they're so close in age, it's kind of like, it's well, awkward. Do you think you're better than me or something? Like, my sister's older than you. So,
there should be no drama with your small group leader.
I think that's another important thing, going back to what you were saying about getting people that are here to stay for the long haul, because they'll know the kids and know how to interact with each individual kid. So you know, a lot of younger people only know how to relate to people that are like them. So if you get someone that's older that will really be able to understand each kid's individual personality, so that way when you have the kids that are a little bit more angsty or maybe a little bit more quiet, they know how to approach them to really like bring the most out of them. And you know, one thing in my small group that I always appreciated was there was just a wide variety of personalities. I was always more of a quiet, reserved, just wanting to listen. But he knew that about me, and he brought me into the conversation to like actually get my opinions. And then you had the other kids that wouldn't stop talking. And he was kind of able to address them and kind of allow other people to have the floor and kind of make it an inclusive group. I mean, he's been in that ministry for I think 13 years.
Yeah.
So he's there. He knows the kids. He loves the kids, and I think that's ultimately the most important thing, is to have people that really care, no matter the age, to really care, put in the time and the effort to make sure these kids are growing spiritually and have the right priorities.
Yeah. I think, I would second that in saying that, like, you see that in literally any ministry, like people who have been in the ministry a long time, you start to see fruit. You start to see that they are able to do ministry like so much better because they have the experience.
Right.
And so like even like me I did child evangelism fellowship with young kids in elementary school, and like the first year to like now, I mean, I've done it since I was 11, so that's 8 years.
Yeah.
And the first year, like, it's like, oh, I can't talk to people. Like, I feel like I don't have authority. I can't tell these kids, like, to sit down and be quiet, or, like, when they need to, or, like, even start a conversation, like, have a small group. And then now it's just, like, easy. It's like you snap your finger and you know exactly what to do, and the kids love you because you're able to relate because you know how it works.
Yeah.
And so it's same thing goes with youth ministry in that, it's a slow process, and maybe you shouldn't establish yourself as a young person like as this huge like authority over people who are like 2 years younger than you. Yeah. But like you grow into it, and then you start to learn where your place is to relate and where you can just come alongside of people and grow with them.
And I think also like another thing is kind of like not having leaders that are like super like legalistic or like super strict on stuff, because like I just remember like obviously I feel like I'm a pretty like bold person and I have like a very strong personality, and I just feel like everyone was like, you know, like if you have a different opinion and then they just like shut you down, they're like, oh, that's like lame, you know, or like they like guilt trip you about something. Like it wasn't like open, like, oh, like that's an interesting thought, and they know how to like respond and be like, oh, okay. Like it was always like, you don't think my way, well, like something's wrong with you, kid, you know, like you're insane, you know, like random stuff like that. So I think that's a big thing, is like, because a lot of kids are there and like they're saved, but maybe they just have a really different thinking than everyone else, and they're like afraid to share that because everyone in the group is so like, no, this is the truth, and anything outside that's wrong, you know. Yeah.
And I think the other thing about that, piggybacking off what you're saying, is not judging the kids for sharing.
Yeah.
Because that's a big thing too. A lot of times when the kid works up the courage to like either confess something or say what he thinks about this, or, you know, say what he thought of the message, there sometimes, and I've seen this, there's like negative repercussion to doing that. It's like, oh, well, like you shared that, like why? Like, and it's like you're completely discouraging the openness of the kid, and now he's probably never gonna say anything for like the next 5 years. Like you just destroyed him. Like you can't do that. So, you know, anytime you have people that are willing to share, let them share. If it's something that's unbiblical, address it biblically, not from a judgmental like, why are you saying that standpoint? Because they're kids. We're all dumb. Like, they're gonna say dumb stuff. I mean, I know adults that say dumb. We're all just not the smartest people. So have grace with people, especially the young people that have no idea what they're doing, and just come alongside them, and whatever they share, be open to hear that, and, you know, guide them in whatever way they need.
And I think that's kind of the whole Berean thing we were talking about earlier coming in, is like, I feel like we would, like, for me personally, I would say certain things like, why is it that we like uphold these modesty standards, or why is it that we're so strict with this or that, or how we do music or whatever. And it's like they would just give like a really lame like reason, and it's like, honestly, like it's challenging for me and probably you, but like for you to give just even if it's like the reason why we do it is because our church is, this is like our focus of our church, and whatever, explain things, because kids, like if you just give a yes or no answer, we're just like, that's rude, or like where's that in the Bible? Because there's no like explicit standard that the Bible says about these things. So it's like at the very least say, you know, this is what the belief our church holds, and so we're gonna have to stick with that. I understand your perspective, and just like affirming like the thought process of a kid, because if there's no affirmation, it's like, well, maybe I shouldn't think, maybe I should just listen to whatever anyone tells me, because like the Bible says it, so I guess we should believe it because they said it. But it's merely opinion. It's
conviction and conscience, and you don't want, like, you as a youth group leader, and really as a believer in general, you should never be pushing your conscience on somebody else. Because that's their conscience. They have their own convictions. You know, you can come alongside them and share what you believe and back that up with whatever you see to be biblical, but you can't just, like you said, give a yes or no answer because I believe it and you should too. Like, that doesn't work. And with, you know, youth, you have to explain and really guide them on why you believe what you believe, to, like you said, to let them think for themselves and encourage them to be Bereans and find that in the Bible. So like, oh, I see what they're saying here, or I disagree here, biblically. And I think that's the most important thing, is coming back to the Bible, because a lot of times people assert their opinions as biblical, and that's not biblical.
And it can be so destructive. Like, for instance, one time I was in a small group and we were talking about dating and marriage, and the leader had, like, this one girl said, I've been really praying about like getting married. She was a senior in high school. She's probably 17, 18. She's like, I've never had a boyfriend, but like I'm considering like maybe starting to date or something like that. And her whole, like, everything she was like opening up to saying, the leader completely shut down and was like, no, you shouldn't be thinking about dating. You guys don't need to be thinking about dating or marriage now. And like, it's, if you start to like date, then you're probably going to fall into sin of lust, and it's just really dangerous. And I had to wait, and all this stuff. And I was just like, no, you don't tell people that. If anything, you should be affirming, saying, really? You want to get married? You're considering this stuff? You should be like backing that up and saying, well, this is what the Bible says, and that's a beautiful thing, and that's amazing that you have this desire for your future, and here's how we can approach that. Whatever. And
we might need to have you for another episode on this, because we've been hammering this nail for like the past 4 months.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I love it. That's
People
great.
need to understand these.
That's great. Yeah, that's so important. And thank you so much for sharing that, because people need to hear that stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's just like the beauty, and like getting a variety of different believers to be the group. I feel like we always like see the typical small group leader, and they're all very similar. Like they're all pretty much the same person. And it's just like so cool when you find someone that's like different, and you're like, oh, like, she's a really godly woman, but she's totally not exactly the same as these other people. Like, she's really different, you know? Like, she even looks different, you know? Like, that's just, like, really cool, because then they bring in a whole different mindset, and you get a whole bunch of different variety of views, not just like, oh, yeah, majority of small group leaders think this way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You want to encourage different schools of thought and, you know, different backgrounds, different lifestyles.
Right.
But, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on to this episode. We really enjoyed having you, and you'll definitely have to be back to talk about that. You last said, because we love that. But I hope you guys all enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Make sure to go follow Tori. All her links will be in the description below. Don't forget to follow us. All our links will be also in the description. And make sure you guys subscribe for weekly episodes, and we will see you guys on the next one.